Hello, Pasquier. I'm very pleased. Are you hearing me? No?
Yes, yes, I can hear you, I can see you.
Great, great. So I'm going to introduce you now. In just a minute we start. Boa tarde, obrigada a todos e todas pela presença. Vamos começar agora falar com o Philippe Pasquier, que ele pesquisa processos criativos e sistemas generativos. Ele é tanto cientista, educador e agregador social em relação a esses assuntos. E as suas contribuições vão desde a pesquisa teórica, com agentes multiagentes, sistemas multiagentes, criatividade computacional, inteligência artificial criativa e machine learning, aplicando na pesquisa artística. Na arte digital, ele trabalha com música computacional e arte generativa. O Philippe Pasquier é professor associado na Escola de Artes Interativas e Tecnologia, onde ele dirige o Meta Creation Lab para a inteligência artificial criativa e é professor adjunto em ciências cognitivas no Fraser University, na Fraser University. Então, agora gostaria de dar a palavra para Philippe. Obrigada.
Thank you. I want to thank Lali, Krotoszynski, and Sylvia Lawrence for the invitation. It's been very interesting to have this interaction, and I was hoping to make it in person, but we got confirmations a little bit too late for that to happen. But I'm nonetheless really happy to get to present to you all today. So I'm going to share my slides, or at least I'm going to try to. Let's have a look. Okay. Can you see the slides now?
Yes.
Maybe just do a thumbs up if you can see the slides. Okay, so I want to talk.
Yeah. We can see your slides.
You can? Perfect. Today I'm going to talk to you about advances in creative AI as we develop them in my laboratory in Vancouver, in Canada. And then hopefully, because we have an hour together, I'm going to have time to talk a little bit about the implications of the computerization of society, and also the advances of artificial intelligence. And so you all heard about it in the news, and I know you all know about artificial intelligence being just simply this idea that machine gets to do tasks that usually it takes a human to do. And in a way, this is really a misnomer because machines are not intelligent. In fact, we don't really know how intelligence really function in all its dimensions and complexities for the case of human. And we certainly don't know how to make machines that are sentient and intelligent. And you probably heard about this debate between strong AI and weak AI. And I am personally of those who think that there is no such thing as strong AI, as we don't really know how to model intelligence. So here in this talk, when I talk about artificial intelligence, I really talk about having machines that do things that it would take a human to do, but making particular specific tasks. And usually those tasks are rational problem solving. That's the usual AI. AI started in the military, and then it was applied in the industry, and now we have AI systems who fly planes, in the Google map or in a map, you can find the shortest path from A to B. All sorts of tasks like that are being automated, and we use them every day. They're in our phones, and they're embedded into all sorts of computer applications. But all those tasks that are automated with AI systems are tasks that are really well defined, in the sense that those are tasks for which there is a good or wrong solution. We call that rational problem solving. And that's interesting, and of course it has a lot of implications and applications. But what we ask as a question in my lab and in the field of creative AI in general is, what about creative task? If we get machine to do rational problem solving is one thing, but can we get machine to help when it comes to creative task? And that's really the idea of computational creativity, which is a scientific field, in fact, that really is looking at automating partially or completely creative tasks. All those tasks for which there is no clear best outcome. There is no optimal solution. There is no such thing as the best design, the best choreography, the best music composition. There is no such thing as a superior or the best interpretation of a piece, or the best level in a video game, the best drawing, etc. So all those tasks of generating those creative artifacts, we call them creative tasks. And that's really what we're studying in my lab. And sometimes we call it meta-creation, sometimes we call it computational creativity, sometimes it is called artificial creativity. It doesn't really matter how it's called. This is just the idea of looking at automating creative processes through algorithmic means. And so when we do that, we look at the fundamental level at what is creativity. Can we understand it? If we can understand creativity, then it's probably something complex. Therefore, for complex systems, it's a good idea, if we have a model, to make a simulation. And if the model is good, maybe the simulation will show some of the attribute of creativity. And so that's really the academic work of modeling creativity. But with creative AI, we can also look at creativity in ways where we know it's not modeling the way humans do it, but still it will generate creative artifacts, and maybe they're interesting even though the process will be different. So that's the idea of creativity as it could be, as opposed to just modeling creativity as it is. So that's really, I wanted to start by defining like that the type of tasks that and work that we do in the lab. And what's interesting, and I know there's a lot of creative people in the room today here, is that we don't do just the science of it, we also do it as an artistic practice. And in fact, I see it as a continuum. There's a continuum often between generative art, which is really the idea of the artist giving some autonomy to a system. It might be to chance operation, or it might be to a very complex system, but this is the idea of giving a little bit of autonomy to the piece in a way. That's the idea of generative art, and that's really the artistic practice side of the spectrum. And but we also are interested in the scientific practice, so computational creativity, this idea of really scientifically studying models of creativity. And so under the appellation meta-creation, when I was naming the lab, and it's inspired by a book by Michael Watlow at MIT Press in the early 2000s, I was thinking of this continuum between art and science. And I think it's one of the fields that is very, very good for mixing that. So I'm going to play a little excerpt here of video, and I hope that the sound is going to go through. Let's have a look. So in this example, we have it's no robots. It's an actual quartet with a percussionist, but they're playing a score that is generated by a machine, and that's really the type of system that we're gonna look at today together. And another continuum that is interesting when we look at generative system is the continuum between purely generative systems, like the one that generated the score, which really is doing what we call style imitation, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But there's also normal software. When we use a software such as a software to make music, nothing will happen if we don't click on buttons. We, as a creator, have to do all the decision by using the software. Well, in between those two extremes of a system that has everything on its own and a system that does nothing on its own, there's of course a lot of space, and that's another continuum that is really important, and I wanted to define it now so that I can use it later. Is that a lot of the systems that we develop, they're not just generative, they're going to be interactive, and in fact there's going to be some collaboration between the human, maybe the composer, and the machine. And as we'll understand, and it's one of the implications, at least that I'm going to try to portray today, is that creative AI doesn't mean that we're going to replace human creativity in any way. So we'll talk today as well about computer-assisted creativity and creativity support tools, and I'll start with computer-assisted composition, so musical composition in that case. One of the tasks which is very much looked at in computer-assisted music composition is the idea of style imitation. And that's sort of a very generic idea that is very popular because of the rise of machine learning. And that's the idea of style imitation. So style imitation is a task defined as such. You have a corpus. It can be a set of paintings. It can be a set of pieces of music. It can be a set of choreography. But let's say it's a corpus with a set of pieces that are representative of a style S. That is, that if I show you one of those pieces, you'll be, oh yeah, that's a piece of that style. And the task is to generate new instances that are not in the corpus, that will be classified by an unbiased observer, that is you or I, as belonging to that particular style. So that's really the task of style imitation. If a machine does that, then it's imitating the style of the piece in the corpus. And so we in our lab have been developing quite a number of style imitation machine. And particularly when it comes to music, we started about 10 years ago with my colleague Arnie Engelfeld by developing a chord progression machine, which allowed us to load a corpus, maybe the composition of a particular composers, Robin, or maybe some Mozart, or some Bob Marley, and the system will analyze the progression of chords, the harmonic progression of the piece, and then we can make a request to the system, and it will generate a new sequence of chord that is of the style of the corpus that we input. And so, for example, and here the system is just really doing the MIDI generation, so it's not really good at playing music, but it generates a sequence of chords. So we can listen to one here. Let's have a look. And in that case, it's a chord progression generated with the system having been trained with some jazz chord progressions. But you can really, with this type of system, feed in any sort of data, and then you will generate new data that is copying, in a way, sort of a pastiche of the type of data that you would feed the system in. And that's a simple idea. That's a very powerful idea. This idea that we can make machine to imitate existing work is not the most impressive type of creativity, but there's certainly people that are paid in studios to imitate some style of music to avoid to pay copyright, or or to generate more music in particular styles. And so it is a task that is interesting to automate. And what happens as well is that myself, I play a little bit of music and I compose a little bit of music. But if I really want to do a chord progression in the style of Pat Metheny, which I like very much in the late 80s, then this system is going to be better than me at doing so. And I'll be able to try a lot of chord progression and maybe work on them and decide after that the one I like and I don't like. Because what's fantastic with generative system is that they can generate ad infinitum a wide variety of outputs. So we did generation for melodies as well, and then we moved on to more complex systems, and I won't get into too much details, systems that are capable of generating not only small progressions, but structures for music, because in music you get sort of a hierarchical structure with sequences of notes forming patterns, sequences of patterns forming parts, etc., etc. And it's harder to make a model that really can reproduce a bigger structure. What's interesting when we did this research on automated composition is that it is harder to make a system that play music from a score than it is to make a system that compose a score. And we always give all the credit to the composer, but we always forget that the musicians is where all the magic happens. And we all know that a really good musician can play a mediocre composition very, very well, while a bad musician will do nothing with a very good composition. And so that was interesting to discover that. And so to alleviate the problem of playing music, we looked in particular at electronic music. Because in electronic music, there's less of the body involved, and so less interpretation and more composition in a way. So we developed a plugin called the Style Machine for a software called Ableton, which is an electronic music production software. And with that software, you can generate electronic music. You load a corpus, you decide the complexity, density, length of the pattern, and hop, you press generate and you start generating patterns. If you don't like a set of patterns, it's going to be rhythm, chord progression, melody, auxiliaries all together. If you don't like a particular pattern, then you generate another one. Maybe you change the parameters a little bit, try a different corpus, etc. And if you like a set of patterns but you don't like the bass line, then you can ask, oh, okay, just change the bass line, give me another one. And so that interaction with the computer is really changing the way we create. It's making it more efficient, more fast, and I will basically be in a position to select what I like. And there's a big difference between knowing what you like and selecting it versus making it. And so that sort of lowers the barrier of entry for creation, and even for professional composers, it offers a way to explore a space very, very quickly and be very efficient in the composition process. So we did use that ourselves in studios with a variety of musicians, and we generated quite a bit of electronic music using this algorithm. So I don't know. I hope you hear the sound okay. I'm sure it sounds okay. I'm sure it sounds a little bit more robotic than it should, but that's okay for this style of music, I guess. And then what's interesting is that, of course, by feeding different corpus to this type of system, you get very different types of output. So here's another example. For example, in this one. etc., etc. And so we actually been playing in algo raves, which is dance parties in Europe and in America now that it becomes more popular, where either there's live coding or there's generative systems generating the music with this type of systems. And we're also publishing albums and releasing records, often without telling people that it's made by a machine. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. We also do computer-assisted sound design, in particular with my PhD students, Mike Thorogood. We've been working on a system called Audio Metaphor, which is online and live. You can try it for yourself, where the idea is that you make a request to the system by typing a natural language request. For example, here at the train station, I hear church bells. And then you say how long you want the soundtrack to be, your sound design to be. And then you're going to decide how happy, we call that the valence and arousal, how happy it is going to sound, or how sad and gloomy it's going to sound, and how eventful it's going to be. And you draw a line of how you're going to actually do that through time. And then once you're ready, you start generating tracks. And the system is going to go find sounds, segment the sounds, classify the sounds based on the emotions in the sounds, and start doing a montage with background sounds and foreground sounds, because we have a system to automatically determine what is background sound and what is foreground sound. And then it's going to generate a mix like this. And each little square here is a different sound source. And then this mix, you can download it in Pro Tools or in Ableton and start playing around with it and edit it. Or you can generate the soundtrack directly there. And so with this system called Audio Metaphor, if I enter a request like a waterfall in Thailand, I might get something like this. With sounds of water and maybe exotic animals. If I say a city in the bush, it might sound like this. It makes both sounds of bushes and sounds of cities together. So all these are made automatically by the system. You can also make more abstract requests for more maybe creative output. If I say quenching rain drenched my burning head, it will sound like this. And so, of course, sometimes the system will be giving a result that is what you expect and what you want, and sometimes less so. But it's so easy to try and generate another iteration that it makes the work really easy. And we do also computer-assisted sound synthesis, but I'm going to skip that for today. So all the systems I talked about until now, the system for computer-assisted creativity. We should look at computer-assisted composition, computer-assisted sound design. But a lot of those generative systems, they can also be used in real time, be used on stage, or be embedded into a system to be used in real time. So we've been working on such real-time system for stage with Arne Egerfield for quite a number of years now. We made a system, this one, with self-organized map that allows to retrieve sound really quickly on stage, and we made system that allows performer to interact with those generative systems. One of the creative tasks that has been looked at in the creative AI community is called continuation, where it's like sort of real-time style imitation. I start playing something, then I stop, then the system will continue in the style I was playing. If I do that on a drum, and that's the idea of the beatback system, then I can maybe train the drum to play the kick and the snare, And then the drum is not going to loop the kick and the snare, but it's going to really generate more material in the style I train it. So I can play for 30 seconds, maybe the kick and the snare, and then I can start playing the tom. And I can build that way a rhythm that I can't play because the machine is playing part of it, and I can extend or augment my drumming abilities. And so with those creative systems in real time, we can sort of augment creative instruments. That was the idea with the beatback system and continuation. But we can also make purely autonomous systems. We call them musical agents, which are just systems that just listen to the music that is being played by others on stage, and generate music in real time. The musical agents we've been working on recently with my PhD students, Kievan Statar, is called MASOM. It stands for Musical Agents with a Self-Organized Map. And this agent is made of two parts. One part is a musical memory. The agent has been listening to a lot of music, a lot of CDs. A bit like a human composer, we believe that to be any good at music, you need to have listened to some. And in fact, if a human was born isolated on an island and never get to listen to some music, I'm pretty sure he would not come necessarily up with things that are considered musical right now. And so we have the musical memory of the agents with all the sounds organized with a variety of features. And then we have another part that is the composition model. And so the agent is listening to different albums of different composers and building a model of this composer, what type of sound is he playing after this sound? And a sort of model of sound transition for each of the composer. And so after that, we can ask the agent to just be reviving, in a way, a composer. And we've been playing live shows in Montreal, in Europe, and we'll be in Zurich later on this year, called Revive, where we use this musical AI to revive dead composers on stage. It's a little bit controversial, of course, but that's the idea of this piece anyhow. And then we play live with those agents, and to keep people busy, we generate visuals as well, because we found out that if you play contemporary music or experimental music to people, they might leave the room. But if you generate nice visuals for them to watch, then they are going to stay. And even the kids and the grandparents are going to like it. That's the magic of visuals. So here is an example of MASOM generating live with visual in collaboration with a Turkish collective Uç, and that was at Ars Electronica, I think. Okay, so that's an example of musical agent and generative system really playing live on stage. And so we did a lot of music generation. As you see, we also did a little bit of visual art and visualization. We started very early working on style imitation for visuals. That was before neural network, deep neural network were invented. And now a lot of this work is less impressive than it used to be, because it becomes a really classic thing to do style imitation. Again, the same style imitation task for visuals. This is my portrait in the style of Rembrandt, and now it's not very impressive because it's very easy to do neural network to do that. We've been working on visual generation with agents as well. One piece that I like an artistic piece that we developed with a student called Justin Love is the Press Station, which is a brain-computer interface piece. And I'm actually preparing with another student a chapter on brain-computer art. There's been now for the last almost 50 years quite a lot of artists that have been looking at using the brain signal of people to interact with the work. In the Press Station, you basically decide on a religion, on a belief system. Can be Christian, can be Islam, can be agnostic if you're not really a believer. And then you put on the EEG headset, and you're going to calibrate it to make sure it's well connected. And we're going to show you your alpha wave and your beta wave. So once you're calibrated, the system will monitor your brain activity. And the alpha waves are for relaxation, and the beta wave for concentration or focus. And these are two things that are obviously important in prayer. And there's evidence for that religious experience really have influence on EEG. So of course, here we do an artwork, the Prayer Station, where you have to pray. And if you pray well, you'll be sort of rewarded by the fact that they will start to have little agents who are going to appear on a big canvas that is in front of you. And it's a video projection. It starts blank, and then if you pray well, maybe those little agents are going to start drawing imagery on the canvas. And it's going to appear to you after a little while of prayer or meditation, maybe if you're into Buddhism, that those agents are drawing religious imagery. And religious imagery that is relative to the belief that you've been choosing. And so throughout the day, we showed it at Isaiah, throughout the day, people will pray, and those images will emerge, which are, in a way, the combination, the addition, the summation of all the prayers during that day. So you will see maybe some Christian imagery. There was a lot of Christian prayers made because we were in Colombia, but maybe some Chinese imagery mixed with some scriptures from different religions. And so it's sort of a reflection on the fact that if there's only one large canvas, then all the belief systems have to share it, or maybe they are competing for it. Who knows? But that's the idea of this piece called the Prayer Station, where we use, in a way, here the generative system to generate those visuals. But everything is driven by the brainwave of the users. The main thing that we found out, by the way, by working with brain signals in art, is that we should not trust brain-computer interfaces too much for now, because they don't really work very well. Right. So that's the Prayer Station, which is again an example of using in real time in museum. Generative systems. We've been working as well on generative levels for video games, because video games are big nowadays, and it makes a lot of sense to generate content for video games, because you want to really offer the best experience to the player. And often when you design interactive experience, and I think that's something that artists should have in mind as well too, not only game designers, you want to keep your audience or your user into the flow state. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the famous flow theory that is used in interaction design a lot. But in the case of experience like games, it really means you don't want the experience to be too easy, to be dull and boring, and you don't want either the game or the experience to be too hard, too obscure, too complicated to access, as to be discouraging and not engaging. You want to keep that flow. And what's interesting is, from player to player, those boundaries of the maximum level, the more complex it can be and the less complex it can be, the actual concrete boundaries corresponding to this flow region they change because you, as a player or someone, for any interactive experience, you will get used to it. You will get better at it. It will take more for you to stay in flow. And so we've been developing the system that not only generate levels, but where we can control the flow zone. And we can make it change dynamically as the player changes. So there is a tension curve for each level, and it changes through time, and it evolves between two boundaries of the more complex the level can get, and the more easy it gets. And those boundaries will evolve through times and with players. And we think this idea of having the experience that really adapt to the user, by having the experience adapt to the audience in real time, we can really develop artwork and content that is more engaging. So that's our work on generating levels for video games. We also did work on generating video. We're interested in generating almost anything, as you can see, but because we're also interested in asking the question whether the creative process and the type of generative process that we use, whether they work across different medium, across different media, across different domain, or are they really specific and different in every domain? So we worked on generative video. Generative video is not easy. So we did generative video with generative soundscape. Here it's ambient video mix. With generative music and with generative soundscape in that case. And because we generate electronic music, so the previous piece was with Professor Jim Bizoki with a videoist of a Canadian videoist, so that's why it was a lot of Canadian scenery, and Arnie Engelfeld for the music. And here with my students, we started working more on generating a music video. So DGMVP is a music video producer project, and because we generate electronic music with the style machine, we thought we would generate video. So this is a video mashup automatically made by DGMVP. And then it goes on, and so we're using that in clubs. And the way it works, and it turns out that video mashup is a real thing on the internet. There's like hundreds of thousands of people who are watching those video mashups, and there's video mashup artists that are doing it manually that are pretty well recognized. So DGMVP is in that category, but it's an automatic system that is really taking the input soundtrack that you give as a request. In our case, it's our electronic music, and it will segment that input, and then it will segment as well a massive. In that case, we use YouTube, which is a problem for copyright infringement, but the video existing music videos are also segmented, and then those segments are matched. And the assumption is that if I put images on top of the music that were corresponding to an existing music video where the music was very similar, then the images will match the rhythm and sort of the energy level pretty well. So that's this generative system here. Generative video is really very difficult because of video being heavy and hard, and it's very hard to generate photorealistic images still to this day, so there's a bit less of that. Another project we did with generative video is a collaboration with Tekla Schifforts and Matthew Gingold called Longing and Forgetting, where we worked with dancers on generating video agents. So a little bit like the musical agents, the video agents are projection in that case, but they're autonomous little agents made of little pieces of videos that are assembled together. And they are assembled in the same way that we do a character in a video game. We call that a motion graph. So there will be a little piece of video for going left, a little piece of video for going right, a little piece of video for going up, a little piece of video for going down. And with those little pieces of video, I can compose them to go anywhere with my agents. So we made those agents for facade projection, if you see on the side of a gymnasium, and we can then go sit on we can move them anywhere we want. So they can stand on a window, like this woman here. They can do all sorts of things, and we control them, and then just inhabit the space that we give them to inhabit. So we've been doing a number of artworks using those video agents, and we can sort of orchestrate choreographies. We showed a version of Longing and Forgetting with agents at ZKM, where they were drawing letters. I don't have any visuals here, but yeah. So that's our work really on video generation, and I will finish because it's a lot of examples already, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the implications by the work we do on generative movement, 3D animation, and dance. So we've been doing some work, and again, a good example of mixing science and art in a way. We started by something very more scientific and fundamental, which is we wanted to know if people can see affect, valence, and arousal, how people are happy or sad, excited or sleepy, just by their movement. Not their facial expression, just looking at the skeleton of a motion capture skeleton of an actor or a dancer. And so we made an online study after we made a lot of takes with dancers. So for each movement, let's say walking, we have 9 different takes. So maybe I walk and I look happy, I walk and I look miserable, I walk and I look excited, and I walk and I look depressed. So I, as an actor or a dancer, we recorded those different ones, and then we asked people all around the world, over 1,000 people in a crowdsourced experiment, do you see the valence and arousal of this take, without telling them? And it turns out they can see it. And it turns out people agree with each other. So there's what we call a very high inter-rater agreement, which means that this is a thing. You can see the emotion of someone, including someone you don't know and you've never seen, just by looking at the way they move. And so we said, yes, cool. If people can see it, we can collect data. If we can collect data, we can train a machine. And now we can do with deep learning generation of movement. So I get you into a motion capture studio for 2 hours, and then I'm going to make you move, and your family is going to be like, that's him or that's her. So we can change the direction, we can change some factors in the movement in real time. And once we have the signature of one movement character, we can move between different performers. Here I have the example with 2, moving from a male to a woman dancer, but you can have as many signatures as you want. I can control how you will perceive the affect in real time, making it less aroused, more calm and relaxed, or making it more tense and stiff. And you can also control to some extent the valence of the character, which corresponds to how miserable, here it looks pretty sad, the character is going to look, or how happy. So that's interesting to be able to capture like that style signature, including some affective dimensions of movement. Of course, we are sort directly at some pretty funky artwork, and we developed the GrooveNet system, where we said, okay, we have electronic music, so we might as well get generative dance going on. And here we have an example of the neural network dancing on our music. I didn't show that publicly too much yet, so it's almost a world premiere. So you'll see, it doesn't look pretty yet, but it looks like it's gonna work. So I'm thinking, this is work in progress really, I'm thinking of using these generated dance maybe in interactive installation where people can play the music they like and then a little avatar will dance. But also maybe working with choreographers and trying to find ways to make this dance in a less believable way, but maybe a more interesting way, because sometimes what's interesting with the systems is when they start doing things that that humans can't really do and explore possibilities that are a little bit more abstract. So we'll work on that in the future, maybe looking at more abstract movement visualization and looking at generative movement. And the last piece I'm going to talk about, I think, is Respire, which is also using movement. And in this case, it's a VR piece that we've been showing in a bunch of places with my students Mariana Pepra, and it's a breath sensor. It's an interactive piece with your breathing, and it's a breath sensor, and the breath is used as such. When you breathe in, you move up, and when you breathe down, when you breathe out, you move down. It's a very simple mapping. But what it does is, again, the visual cortex, you're in this abstract space and you move up when you breathe in and you move down when you breathe out. It means that whether you're a yogi or an expert meditator or not, you will see and connect with your breathing right away. So it's again an artwork, it's relaxing and it's a nice experience, but we also make here again art and science, and we now try to see and study it for breath regulation. Because now I can slow down your movement or ask you to go somewhere to control and help you regulate the amplitude and the speed of your breath and your breathing in general. And so all of a sudden, what is just an interactive artwork at the beginning can become a tool for health and breath regulation work, awareness, and maybe even mindfulness. So there's a lot of research in VR and in those spaces, and so we're doing a little bit of that. Yeah. Okay. So another thing that we do quite a bit of is to try to see how good the system are. And by that I mean, can humans tell that the artifact, if I make generative music, if I make generative video, if I make generative levels of video game, can human tell that it's made by a machine or not? And so we've been designing and working on a number of methods to study exactly that. And it's complicated. And typically it's more important to do this evaluation when it's like scientific work, like style imitation. And the art world is, of course, more about informal evaluation and where the artistic quality of the work. So there's a diversity of practice and therefore a diversity of way to evaluate the systems. But what makes inherently the systems complicated is that we're looking at creative tasks for which there's no optimality, impression, judgment are deeply involved. Some people love the electronic music we generate. Some people hate it the same way they would love electronic music in general or would hate it in general. And then, so the choice of the corpus, the choice of the parameters, all sorts of decisions when using the system are really changing the way the system generates. And also the system can generate so many different outputs. And like you and I, when we make work, sometimes it's genius and sometimes it's garbage. Sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's not. There's a diversity and a variability in the quality of those systems. So all in all, it's really hard to evaluate them. But we still do it, and we made experiments. I'm not going to go into the details, but they look a little bit like a Turing test, where we play, for example, excerpt from the corpus, original composition by composers, and excerpts that are generated by the system. So for example, we can do an example with the first system I showed you is chord progression. So here there's 2 chord progression, and I can play them, and we can try to decide together which one is human, which one is computer. And you'll see it's very hard to do. Let's play the first one. And that would be the second one. All right. So who thinks that the first one is a computer? And who thinks that the second one is the computer? See, so we're about half-half, and it turns out that the second one is the computer in that case, and the first one is original from Frédéric Chopin. So you see, it's really difficult. So the system is human competitive, yes, maybe can imitate Chopin really well, but here it was just a small excerpt, out of context, without interpretation, just a sequence of chords. It's very difficult to discern the original from any sort of imitation. And yet they're all different, and we might prefer some or the other. So those systems are really raising some sort of issues. And we made experiments really showing that people can't tell. And it doesn't matter if they're expert or not. If everyone in the room was a composer, you would not have get better results at describing it or at finding it. It's rare that experts get it. On average, they don't get it more often than a non-experts. What's interesting, though, is that experts have a lot more arguments. They're much more convinced by their judgment, and they have a lot of explanation for it, even though it's still wrong. But at least they have a reasoning for it. So those systems are human competitive. Some of them are anyway. And so that raises a number of questions. And we were interested as well. That is, in general, when we do the test, we don't tell people, beforehand which one is computer, which one is not. And we try to maybe assess the quality of the piece independently of whether it's computer or not. And then we were interested in looking at whether it changed something if people know that it's made by a computer. And it turns out that it does change something. In fact, David Cope, who very early on was doing generative music, very, very good generative classical music with the system EMI, Experimental Musical Intelligence, had issues. The music is arguably really good, pastiche of classic music, but if you like Mozart, you can always take a little bit more Mozart. But he had issues that had to do with the bias against computational creativity. Orchestras, professional, were not willing to play machine-made music. And the press was really, really harsh on David Cope. They said he was a fraud, and there was really strong emotional reaction to the fact that creativity is not something that machines are supposed to touch in some ways. And there's a sort of number of taboos around creativity that are complicated to address, and that this field, in a way, is also dealing with. So we did a study ourselves, follow-up studies. There's only 3 scientific studies of the bias against computational creativity. The outcomes is not very clear, so I'm not going to get into the details. What's interesting to note is that we believe at this stage that it has something to do with whether people have a high level of computational literacy or not. And people who know really well how to program computers sort of understand and get reminded that behind those machines that generate art, there is an artist. And then the stigma is not as strong for generative art as it is for creative AI. And so once you get reminded that it's anyway machines are made by humans, then the machine is not the creator, but the human behind it is. then you get to change a bit the perspective. And so people who have good computational literacy have a less of a bias, is what we think now. So all those generative systems, they do matter. In fact, not only because it's fundamental research about creative processes, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and that's what we do in university to generate knowledge. Not only because generative art as a cultural practice, as an history, and it's a viable practice. It's one of the practices that really embrace with the current technology and the medium of our time. You know, we use computers and phones and generative systems through AI and machine learning every day, all the time. It makes sense that artists embrace those medium as well. But also for a pragmatic reason, is that we are moving from linear media to nonlinear media. And it means that nonlinear media, you require generative systems a lot more, because the more a system is interactive, the more there's branches and potential future and different experiences for your audience or your user. But the more there's a lot of assets. In video games, they really have this problem now that if you have 12 million players like World of Warcraft playing 20 hours per week, how many hours of music do you want to generate? If you want the music to change with what's happening in the game, adapt to the experience, adapt to the preference of the user, then going generative is going to be more and more important. There's a problem now in the game industry where games are really expensive to make, more expensive than films, more expensive than TV series, and so they need to develop those generative systems. And then I hate sitting in front of a computer clicking on buttons. Software right now are mostly inert. We need to enhance creative software. Every industry has benefited from AI and automation, and we artists, we open a software and then we have to click on buttons for hours, weeks, sometimes months. There's people whose job it is, in animation and stuff. And we want to eventually bring some of that power that is available right now into the software, as well as eventually lower the barrier of entry for some users that are not composers or they're not animators, but they could with the system generate easily content that they like and that they use and work with. So the computerization of society has been brutal. It's not been democratic. We never voted for being on a computer 8 hours a day, every day. And then, the computer environment, I like this picture here, is reminding us that, it might be better than chain work during the Industrial Revolution, but it still pretty much looks a little bit like that with, humans clicking on buttons and pressing letters of the alphabet on the keyboard all day long. And so that's not very satisfying. We need better interfaces and we need smarter systems so that we spend less time in front of a computer. The industry is really engaging now with generative systems. Melodrive, Google Magenta, Amper Music, Spotify, a lot of generative music, generative systems in the industry. In terms of audience, it started to really penetrate the audience. I think for the first time last year, the work of Stromae and Skinch with François Pachet was the first AI-generated song and music that was in the top 40 in Europe for a few days at least. And so that's really moving forward. And at the same time, of course, it also raises fears. And those fears are nothing new. They're fears when things are changing and when there's novelty. There's a fear of technological unemployment. Again, I don't have the fear of strong AI, so I'm not going to talk about the fear of machine taking the world, because that will not happen. But there's the fear of technological unemployment, and that's not a new fear. When the musicians were removed from theaters because recordings were being played in theaters and in cinema, there was already this fear and protest, and it turned out that music is still a thing, and being a musician is still a thing. And so often those fears are unfounded, and the truth is that we just need to accommodate those changes. I'm a big believer in anthropocentric instrumentalism, and that we make the technology we think we need. And I don't think we should be prisoner or slave of those technologies, but we should just design them and make sure they serve us. And that's why at CIAT, at the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, where I work, we're interested in computational creativity, but mostly we're interested in it in order to really harness the power of machines to expand our creativity and making sure that designers and artists have enough computational literacy to be part of the debate regarding computers and computerization of society and regarding the design of those machines, which apparently we'll spend the most of our awake time with. So that's going to be it for me. I want to remind that, it's me talking, but it's a work of a lot of people, students. For those who are interested in creative AI, there's also a free online class with Cadence. Cadence is a great MOOC. I don't get money from them, but I'm happy to say they're great. They started by CalArt in California, and their idea is that if we don't teach art online, then there will be more business and more engineering classes online and less culture around. And I think they're right. So I think we need to engage with online teaching. There's only 7% of the world population who goes to university, and there's 92% of the world population that has the internet. So let's give them the knowledge online. And finally, I want to thank the funding bodies here in Canada that are helping the work happen. And for those who are interested in generative music, I want to point at the International Workshop on Musical Meta Creation, which we organize every year. That's really for generative music specifically, both the creative artistic side and the scientific research around it. We welcome everyone there. And then for movement computation, dance, movement generation, and anything to do with movement, there's a MOCO conference that we organize every year. I'm just on the steering committee, but I think this community might be interested in some of that. All right, so that's it for me. I thank you for your attention, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions if there are some.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I hope are you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
And now I open for questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Philippe, for your presentation. This is very impressive presentation, showing us all the possibilities of the technology of AI. But I have one question about the creativity. There is one word that you didn't mention, that is consciousness. Are you interested in understand the role of consciousness in the matter of creativity?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. Yeah, so I have to say that I made the presentation in a way without focusing so much on modeling creativity. And I should have had maybe a few slides to explain that. A lot of the system I looked at, they really look at one particular type of creativity that is a very simple type of creativity that is called exploratory creativity, where you just try to imitate a particular style. And there's a lot of other types of creativity. And often in art, when we talk about creativity, we talk about a different type of creativity that the English philosopher of creativity, Margaret Boden, calls transformational creativity. So for example, what's important with good artists is they're not copying someone else's work, is that they produce really original, novel work, but not original novel just because it doesn't exist before, but novel because it changes the notion of style. right? And none of the systems I presented are doing any of that. And I think consciousness and intention, to answer your question, is of course very important in creative endeavors, especially for transformational creativity, where there's really an intention and you need to really give that creative energy, and you're really pushing the boundaries by inventing a new style. For example, when Duchamp came up with the urinoir, when he puts a toilet bidet into a museum, he's inventing a new style, objet trouvé, and this type of concrete art making, and he has to argue for it. He has to justify it, because that's like changing the definition of what is an artwork, and so this type of creativity is really the one that require, I think, consciousness, intentionality, and there's no example of automatizing that. So it's a little bit the same as when I say, when people talk about AI, all we do now is not making intelligent machines that are sentient. All we do is automating precise tasks. And we can make a machine that really is very good at chess, but it does only chess. And if you throw that machine into the water, it's not going to start swimming. And that's the real beauty of real intelligence and human intelligence, is how polymorphic, generic, and adaptive it is. And so we have no idea how to make that with machines. The same way, with creativity, we have simple creativity, which is just about creating novel example in an already known style. That we do well. And the other types of creativity, it's harder. And that has to do indeed with the fact that we don't know how to model intentionality or consciousness. So of course, we're very far from getting that into those systems. Now, in defense of creative AI and people modeling creative process, there's also new algorithms that are very promising and interesting, such as novelty search, surprise search, where you really give the machine the mission, not only to replicate a style, but also to do it in a way that would be as far as possible from all the other examples while being in the style. And those type of new algorithms I didn't talk about today, they're a bit more surprising, interesting in the output they have in terms of the creativity of it, in a way. I would say they're a little bit more creative, but still very far from considering, the type of intentionality and of course consciousness that human creators would put into their work. So so the simple answer is no one is really looking at consciousness in those systems.
Thank you very much.
Você pode fazer a tradução?
Posso.
Boa tarde a todas e a todos. A minha pergunta não sei se é uma pergunta, é uma colocação. Eu queria saber a sua opinião a respeito.
He wants to know your opinion about something he's going to mention now.
A respeito dos artistas perderem o emprego por causa do algoritmo. Né? Eu concordo que não tem essa chance de acontecer.
He agrees that there's no chance of AI taking over the artists.
No entanto, no contexto que a gente está vivendo, eu fico pensando em qual que é a potência de um cenário no qual não precisa de artistas para fazer uma certa arte. Por exemplo, não precisa de um músico para fazer um set de uma boate numa noite inteira.
Then he would like to know
Nesse contexto político.
How do you consider, in this context we are living today, that one could use a computer to produce topical works, qual é o exemplo que você falou?
Numa boate.
In a dancing club or something, this could be a trouble for artists, because we have been very constrained in
Então,
the
na verdade, o
world.
problema acho que não é assim a questão do perder o emprego, a questão da coisa poder ser feita sem a gente, assim, só pela questão técnica e pela facilidade. Isso é um problema.
Isso
Mas é uma
comercialmente-
questão de que lugar, comercialmente, sim, também, mas o problema maior não é esse, porque esse é o problema, nós vamos perder, não vamos. Eu duvido que a máquina vai fazer tão bem quanto a gente, assim, né? Mas o problema é o seguinte, que lugar na sociedade que a gente passa ocupado aí? Né? Assim, qual é a visibilidade que se dá para os artistas? Porque a gente já está vivendo um contexto em que cada vez mais a arte é inútil, né? E a arte, ela é... Nossa, obrigado por lembrar, desculpa. É mais essa questão do contexto e que visibilidade que a gente ganha nesse contexto, onde já tem várias tentativas para desestabilizar o trabalho. É mais uma questão política, né? Politicamente, como é que é?
He is asking politically. We live in times where artists are not valorized, are not valued. So in this case, much of artists' works could be transferred or replaced. So what do you think about that? We know it's not interchangeable, but not as artists, but politicians and other kinds of people that don't think that art is important. How do you think this might impact the art world?
Great question. Thank you for the question. It's more political question, and the political changes all around the world right now, and I know it's the case in South America as well, make me think even stronger than I was saying it before, that I'm not afraid of machine intelligence, but I'm really afraid of human stupidity. Because what's happening with politics is not very nice, at least in Europe, with the rise of popularism, and in America, as everyone I'm sure knows. And when it comes to the value of and the consideration of artists, I first sort of want to push back a little bit on the premise. I'm not quite sure that artists are not values. It really depends what you mean by artist. And at some stage, one has to be honest that, you know, artists are now more known. I mean, Michael Jackson is more known than the Bible. So, you know, artists are really valued. Art is super important in every society known to man, especially popular art. And if you consider video games and interactive experience as art forms, video games is now way larger than TV and film together. So computer entertainment, if considered as an art, is certainly on the rise, and there's a tremendous amount of value there, including the fact that all the artists and creators, I'm in Vancouver, we have 1,500 digital art companies in Vancouver, Pixar studios, and half of the Hollywood movies are getting filmed here. All my friends working for Marvel are really well considered artists. So I want to push back. But now I know what you mean, because you're talking about contemporary art and academic art. And in a way, there is such a thing as, if you do experimental underground art, or if you do art that is marginal, then you will be considered as such. And I don't think there's any moment in history where it was much different. So that's just a reflection on, you know, are we right in thinking that artists are not considered? In Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts just doubled the budget of culture in Canada in the last 3 years. Now, Canada is not like everywhere, so maybe I'm just being too not aware that in other places, and I know that for the US, for example, art funding and support for the art tends to more disappear. But that doesn't mean to say that artists are not considered, or that they're not important, and that they're not impactful. So that was my first part of the answer. The other part of the answer is that when we talk to politics and creative AI, then I think what's important to talk about is technophilia and technophobia. I'm not worried that artists are not considered. I'm more worried that if you're an artist and you don't use technology, then it might make a difference in the way you're considered. And there is increasing pressure to use technology. I know that it's easier to get funding in Canada, for example, but in Europe as well, if you do art that engage with machine learning and AI than if you do experimental poetry on paper and without relationship to technology. And so there's a strong bias of our society that I find is technophilic, and I am very interested in the debate between technophilia and technophobia. And I think there's a number of reasons to raise technophobic argument nowadays, because we live in a time where it almost feels like the autonomy of technique, which is a technophobic argument of a French philosopher called Ellul, is what we live through. And the autonomy of technique is this idea that everything that is technically possible will be tried and is done, and we always regulate, decide, discover after the fact. And I'm a researcher in AI, and I'm always surprised that, oh, we can do this, that, and that, and nobody decided. And so that raised the question of who is in charge. And that's really the question that humanity is facing now, increasingly so, is what do we do together? And it feels like we really have this problem. And it's a problem of human consciousness, of dialogue, and of communication. I'm very much a humanist, but I find there's not enough dialogue and not enough policies to discuss technology, their application in art and elsewhere, and their implication and the balance between the use of technology, necessary slow down that we need to put on the development of those technology, so that we can regulate them and do what Jürgen Habermas has been talking about for a long time, which is this idea of pre-science, this idea of not letting only science, scientific expert and techno-scientific expert decide everything and move forward as fast as they can, which is what they do now. And I find that's the political problem that I'm interested in is exactly this one, is how to allow the development of techno-science to be brought back into the democratic debate. I don't know if it answers the question even partially, but that was my best attempt.
Thank you.
Well, hello. I'm Lima, and I ask you in Portuguese, please, traduction for me. Diante do que o Gustavo, a pergunta anterior, trouxe, e também eu queria fazer um outro apontamento com relação a esse imbricamento homem-máquina e nessa fruição, né? E como fica os rastros culturais nesse processo, com relação à própria música, às suas raízes, levando em consideração a acústica, a questão da acústica. Essa é a minha pergunta. É mais com relação à estética. Tema estética.
She wants to know, her question is related to the other one, and she wants to know regarding the man-machine merging, how do you consider the cultural marks and the cultural marks that
pegadas culturais,
the cultural traces that will remain or not regarding acoustics? She wants to know it regarding acoustics specifically.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand the question. Do we feel that acoustic can be threatened?
Sorry?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you repeat the question?
Okay. She wants to know regarding the, I think, the increasing of man-machine music making. How? Oi? The cultural traces of music produced, how do you see that reverberating into the research of AI, doing music and so on? And just a minute, o que você falou sobre acústica que eu não consegui entender? Acústica? No aspecto mesmo da fruição da música. From the point of view of hearing music, of listening to music.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. It's a complex question. Thank you for asking that question. I don't think acoustic music is threatened. I mean, humans have been doing music forever, and that's not going to stop tomorrow. Now, the listening abilities of humans. So on the listening side, I'm interested in soundscape ecology and acoustic ecology, and our listening and our hearing capabilities are changing and have been changing, in part due to the change of soundscape in the environment, because the idea of soundscape ecology is to look at how the sound in different places evolve, the same way that we look at how the environment, the visuals environment and the atmosphere evolves. And soundscapes are changing very rapidly all over the world and always in the same direction of more noise pollution. But that has to do with the fact that we transform the world we live in. There's a lot of us and we're very powerful beings, and so we make everything around us transformed, and so we transform the sound ecology around us. Now we make our music. We used to make our music with what was around us before, percussions, and then we started inventing instruments, and then we started inventing much more powerful generic instrument, the computer, and everything is a computer. You don't have a phone, you have a computer that can make phone calls. You don't have a car, you have a computer that has wheel. You don't have a microwave, you have a computer that can eat food. So more and more, everything is going to become a computer. So all of a sudden, from all the diversity we had, we're down to one instrument that is going to more and more be embedded everywhere. This is something that happened. We didn't vote for it, we didn't decide for it, it happened. Now, what does it mean? In the future, it means that we need to make sure that we don't lose everything in terms of, for example, the tactility of playing music, the quality of listening to acoustic music that is not mediated by speakers. If it's mediated by speakers, the quality of the speakers themselves, the quality of the headphones if you use headphones, and then you need to just make that transition as smooth as possible, and also start already working on the preservation of all the other techniques. Some of them are really well preserved and will preserve well, I think, and some will be endangered, and some will disappear. Since this, nobody is being is being attentive or careful or taking care of old telephones. Analog telephones are very much disappeared. So there will be changes that will mean disappearation, and there will be conservation. It's really up to us and groups of humans in their culture to decide for their culture together what works for them.
Thank you.
Nice talk. My question is, well, I believe mostly people do their decisions based on their culture. Pretty soon we're gonna have music handmade by machine learning. We're gonna have movies handmade by machine learning, and pretty soon we may be able to actually control people to do things because we'll be actually molding their culture. We're gonna have propaganda handmade by people to each people. That's probably gonna be really effective. So probably people will start losing their ability to take decisions on their own. Taking that in consideration, what do you think is going to be our culture like in 100 years because of machine learning?
I understand, yes, is a long time. But I want to push back again. I want to push back just for the sake of the argument, because these are discussions that are too important to be had that quickly. But just for the sake of thinking, to play the devil advocate, I also want to push back on the fact that with those machines, people will not be able to make decisions on their own anymore. And ask, when is the last time people were capable of making decisions on their own? Exactly. Right? So, it's very much a sense of context. And so, whether we see those machines as empowering us to do better or as dooming us to complete failure is very much a way of looking at it. And I can, like you, think of all the wrong things one can do with machine learning. And for example, there's already generative advertisement, very powerful persuasive computing done with machine learning. A lot of systems that are controversial, like Replica.ai, where you can train a machine to be exactly like you with all your conversation, and when you're dead, this machine continue to answer people in your behalf and things like that. So all sorts of ethical problems, all sorts of wrong approaches or approaches that should be discussed. And again, I think there needs to be more democratic debate so that we get to discuss where we go. Now, the machines are never the problem, and the algorithm are never the problem. The knowledge is never the problem. It's a bit like for nuclear physics. You can use nuclear physics for good or for bad or not use it. We still, the physicists and academics still think knowledge is important. So we generate that knowledge, and again, we're exactly in that same situation where we can not use it, or use it for good, or use it for bad. This is what the market and humans will decide together. And that's really the failure of us collectively to not verify those technology for good. For example, there is a brother called Brave who uses the Bitcoin system underlying to just remove advertisement while maintaining the possibility to make money by publishing content on the internet, because there's millions of people that do independent blogging, independent reporting, and a lot of writers now that survive on the internet. They need to get some money if there's thousands of people reading them. So if you want to do that without advertisement, we have a solution. We have a solution. We know how to do it. It's all about politics in the sense of communicating to people, getting people involved, and making people have people make the switch, right? And so this problem of mobilizing people for the right reason to do the right thing is the problem that is really pervasive in our society. And we can observe that problem and fear that machine learning and AI will be misused. And I think we're right in fearing that. I fear it too. When you look at the current government in the US, you know that they're going to try, if there's a way things can be misused, they're probably going to misuse it. And that has to do with those people, right? Not with the knowledge, not with the technology itself. We will never solve a problem of human by blaming the technology. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I hope this answers some of your question.
Hello, Philippe. My name is Martin. Thanks for your comprehensive overview on this topic. While being a designer and engineer myself, I have, of course, more sober view on these tools, and that's what I see. They are tools in the end, and comparing maybe to other genres, like having iMovie is also a tool, and most people will be very happy on the kind of ready-mades they can do with it, and that helps them. It's an assistive technology in the end. It helps them to make the family video quite quick. But nobody, no award-winning movie maker will use it, of course, to make their own movie cuts. With iMovie, they would use other tools, no? And also if you look, for example, at a tool like CorelDRAW, no? CorelDRAW is a bad graphic program, and you will actually see people, when they make their designs with CorelDRAW, it imprints the aesthetic quality of CorelDRAW onto these results, because of basically it just supports the lack of creativity of people. So looking at the tools you're doing, they actually are quite sophisticated, and they're giving a lot of, they assist you in doing many things. But from my experience, actually tools who put too many constraints in the end, and that's what you're doing. You put a very big corset of constraints, giving the path quite thoroughly already what to do, and actually you leave the openness completely out of it. So that's why people prefer to use processing over CorelDRAW, for example, because it gives them enough technology, and at the same time it gives them the freedom actually to put their creativity in and not have it constrained by the taste of that program you made. Thanks.
Yes, so if I understand the question is about the fact that if I automate, the more I automate part of a task, the more I constrain the process in a way. So I get the argument, and I think it's interesting, and I think it's true. I myself been quite interested in the relationship between artists and their tools. And you're right, when you use Corel or when you use even Photoshop, sometimes you don't know with the photographer, but you know the plugin they use, because you can see the tool being really much visible in the artwork itself. Same with in music, you hear a violinist, and maybe he's playing a Stradivarius, and some people would recognize the violin without knowing who is playing on it necessarily. So the tools artists use are really, really important. In my lab, and that's the idea of generative art, we make the tool that we use, and so we're really interested in creative computing. And I think when you said people use processing or CorelDRAW, when you use a framework that allows you to really do the art from scratch yourself, of course, in terms of the user, you got a lot of creativity because you're unbounded and unrestricted. But that's precisely the power of those computer-assisted creativity tools that they just do a lot of the work for you. Now, they are also unbounded in some ways. For example, with style imitation, you can load any style you want, and once you do, so I didn't talk about that, but you can do style interpolation, style extrapolation. You can, so I can do this, give me the harmonics of Bob Marley with the rhythm of Metallica, or things like that, and explore mixes that might or might not be aesthetically interesting for me, but for sure I would not spend the time doing it by hand, right? And so the idea here is to allow new functionalities in the creative process that are just not possible with existing tools. But I am not saying that we should remove the existing tools. Like, I'm not proposing any change or systematic approach there at all. It's very important to keep all the diversity of tools. I myself, when I play music in concert, don't use any AI system. Like, I personally like playing, I have my controllers and, my system in Max MSP that I developed myself, and also some patches from friends that I like. And I have my little lutherie, my little instrumentation. And that's very important that I keep that and I get to have the level of expressivity I feel I need on stage. So we're developing those tools because we generate knowledge, and we do it as an academic, intellectual adventure. Then we're also interested eventually in the potential, but I'm not an evangelist for those tools. And again, I think they are, if anything, adding possibilities rather than removing any, since we're just adding them to existing tools. And as you noticed as well, the whole plan is to add them to augment tools. I'm not so much into inventing new instruments or inventing new tools because I think we already have too many. And one of the problems of creating, especially creating with computers, is it takes 20 years to be an expert at violin, or 10 years minimum, if you want to have any sort of proficiency. Well, with a computer software, usually a computer software will not survive 10 years. And so by the time you become really good at using those tools, the tools have changed. Miller Puckett, the programmer of Pure Data, was always saying that because he's a violinist himself. And being a virtuoso is really important if you want to be a good artist. With digital tools, they change so fast that you cannot become a virtuoso. So that's really a general problem with virtuality. That's why I think, again, that we need to keep all that in mind. And there's really, for the modern artist, a palette of tools. And depending on, a particular artwork or a particular need in the practice, you can decide to use technology or not. And if you do, to use generative systems or not. But all those tools have different affordances. There's things you can do with the tools I showed today you can't do, or very difficult to do otherwise, at least not in the same time. And there's definitely a lot of things you can do with other tools that you can't do with those tools. And that's really the proper of that. So we're just adding to the palette of different tools. I hope this answers the questions.
I want to thank you very, very much. It was a very impressive talk, and we sure had a great time and with the questions. And I hope we do that someday again. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Philippe.